Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A lot of the talk around this Michigan program heading into 2024 is about how much talent this team is losing to the NFL draft. And Dill, I think a lot of Michigan fans certainly understand this. Probably not a lot of college football fans across the country, though. This Michigan defensive line is returning two dominant players on the inside, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Want to take a look into the film of what really makes Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant so special, and largely how this defense really runs through the dominance of the inside of that defensive line. Extremely excited to get into this. The Michigan fans that have been rocking with the boys for the last couple of weeks and months, y'all know how we feel about Mason Graham. I think this is a guy that could go top 10 in the NFL draft in 2025. Extremely excited to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out to the Michigan fans. It truly has been a blast taking film deep dives into guys like Jay Sean Barham, like Rod Moore, Makari Page. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I'm high on Mason Graham. I think you're higher on Mason Graham than me. I don't know if there's anyone higher in the country on Mason Graham than you are. I'll give you the T-box here. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. What do they bring to this Michigan defense?
No, you'll never find someone higher on Mason Graham than me. I just think, again, how dominant he was all year, how consistent he is, just does everything. Can rush the passer, stand up double teams. When they want him to get in the backfield, make plays like they did against Alabama in that overtime period, he can do it. And then for Kenny Grant, you just kind of saw him slowly emerge into being a dominant force towards the end of the year. I think maybe started a little slow, wasn't playing a ton, but then you get into that Penn State game. That's about as good as I've seen him play. And then he closes it out, dominating Washington. I mean, you really started to see him emerge. And when those two running together, along with obviously Jenkins and some of the other guys they had last year, they really emerge into a dominant unit. And I can't wait to see what these two do together next year.
You're so right about Kenny Grant. Like Mason Graham, the minute he stepped on the field as a true freshman, like he was dominating the college football landscape. Kenneth Grant was a guy that a little bit of a slower cook in terms of the progression that he made. But you're right. You go back to the end of the year film for Kenneth Grant, you're looking at a dominant guy on the inside. Dill, what excites me the most is these are two guys that are only going into their third year of college football. It is extremely rare for guys to come in on the defensive line and dominate like these two have during their first 2 years of college football. Now, in my mind, getting into what Mason Graham, what Kenneth Grant bring to this Michigan defense, we're going to talk about the flash plays, right? Shooting gaps, getting tackles for loss, getting pressure on quarterbacks. But what I think makes them so special is, yes, they do the flashy stuff well, but man, they do the dirty stuff extremely well. And when you talk about an all-encompassing interior defensive lineman, you need those kind of reps, right? Sitting on double teams. You talk about why Junior Colson, Michael Barrett looks so good on the film. It's because they're playing behind two guys on the inside that keep them clean, that win at the point of attack. And I think that's where you really got to start. When you start getting into the film, some of the most special reps that you see a guy like Mason Graham have, it's not the 5-yard tackle for losses. It's sitting on double teams, letting your linebackers flow downhill. I think this is a perfect example, right? Working against the center and right guard, kind of playing that 3 technique, and he is standing up double teams. I mean, this is a guy that as a former wrestler knows how to play with leverage, and he allows these linebackers to get downhill and make their plays at the line of scrimmage. I think that's truly where it starts for Mason Graham. And you talk about getting off blocks, there's no one better in the country at using his hands, disengaging than Mason Graham.
And I think that's kind of a consistent thing in terms of how Michigan wants to play defense. Like, they're not asking their defensive linemen, especially those guys on the interior, to try to get in the backfield as quickly as possible with swims or various slants. I mean, a lot of what they're fundamentally trying to do is get their hands on offensive linemen, engage them, and reset the line of scrimmage maybe a yard into the backfield, and then try to shed a block and make a play. I think you see a lot of teams have kind of gone to like maybe how Penn State likes to play. And Penn State's got a good defense. So like you can do it both ways, but you also kind of give up possibilities of long runs. You saw Michigan rattle off a couple long runs on Penn State. And that is, I think, in some part because They want their guys, they want them swimming in, they want them getting in the backfield, trying to get free and make plays. I mean, when you watch Mason Graham and Kenny Grant play, they're always getting their hands on defense or offensive linemen. And you kind of talk about it. Why does Michael Barrett and Junior Colson get to run a little free? It's because those two are constantly getting their hands on guys and making it really hard to find those big creases that maybe you see against other teams.
I totally agree. And that's what they ask him to do. And again, you've checked the film out, right? Double team with the right guard and center. Mason Graham is standing these guys up. And look, it allows these linebackers to come downhill, play free, make their plays at the line of scrimmage. Again, you see Mason Graham somehow getting off 2 blocks and making the play. I think it's special. And again, you can even see guys like Kenny Grant do it as well. And Kenneth Grant, the way he can move laterally for his size continues to be extremely impressive. You run the clip here. I mean, again, continuing to win at the line of scrimmage, take on double teams, continue to move laterally and make a play. It's rare to find defensive linemen that have the size that Kenneth Grant does, but also the ability to be athletic, to be dynamic in the run game. A lot of the guys that you see Kenneth Grant's size, they just 2-gap, right? They'll just sit there. Kenneth Grant, the ability to move laterally and get off and disengage blocks. I think that's really where it's special. Now, Dill.
And I think against Penn State, like you see what that lineman's trying to do. He kind of knows that those guys are going to try to get on him. I mean, Kenny Grant, the second that ball snapped, his hands are on that center. He's engaging him. That center tries to peel away. You're right. That's where Kenny Grant's athleticism can make you pay. It's like Michigan wants their guys to get their hands on their opposing offensive lineman in that center. If he doesn't want to stick on that double team and work it up to the linebacker, you see Kenny Grant having the athleticism to, again, make that guy pay. And in that, I think, is what makes it so hard to deal with Michigan's defense as a whole, because those defensive linemen, they create a lot of traffic, but they also can disengage and make the plays when teams want to just try to get off them quickly and get up to backers.
Now, these are the clips that I wanted to start with, and Dill talked me off the cliff. I was like, let's start with the flash plays. Dill's like, no, we got to start with the dirty work. Talk about what makes Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant so special. Now we get into the fun part, and that is Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant being the game wreckers that they can be at the college football level. First play of off the line of scrimmage for Michigan on the defensive side of the football against Penn State. Dill, Kenneth Grant and his ability to get off the ball at his size is truly incredible. I think it's just a sign of how well coached and how well developed these guys are in terms of using their hands and getting off blocks. You roll the film right here. 1, phenomenal get off, but 2, look at him use his hands, put that center right in on his face, get behind the line of scrimmage, make your play. I mean, Kenneth Grant, the ability to get off the line of scrimmage, use his hands, extremely special. Now you go to Mason Graham. This is what we see consistently from Mason Graham. The get off, extremely impressive, puts an easy swim move on this guy immediately into the backfield. That is such a hard reach block for so many centers. I'll tell you this, there's not many centers in the country that can successfully make that block against Mason Graham because of how good he is off the line of scrimmage, immediately into the backfield, absolutely blowing up a play. Yes, they do the dirty work at a high level, but man, do they create those splash plays that win you football games, right? Those are drive-killing plays. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant consistently making those plays.
I mean, you're really right. Those shouldn't be like ignored. I mean, that play against Alabama, I think I referenced it earlier. I mean, that's about as big of a play as existed in that football game. To be able to knock them back 4 yards right kind of off the rip, I mean, so disruptive, made it really hard to score, and ultimately probably had a big part in why Michigan won. So, again, I think you're right to point out that, yes, probably the base of what Michigan wants to do is they want their defensive linemen to get their hands on linemen and try to let their linebackers work and be free. But also, when they're asked to turn it loose, those two can cut it loose and be as dynamic as anyone in the country.
They can cut it loose in the run game, but I also think what separates them, I mean, this is, I think, a large separator from guys on the inside of the defensive line that are solid and then those that are special. And I think that's the pass rush, right? Especially in this read option kind of landscape of college football. If you can generate your pressure with the guys from the inside, that's massive. And I think Mason Graham is one of the better, if not the best interior defensive lineman at rushing the passer. You think about all the elite pass rushers Michigan had last year: Josiah Stewart, Braden McGregor, Jalen Harrell, Derek Moore. Still, Mason Graham was second in the team in quarterback hurries. Not only, I mean, the 3.5 sacks, I don't think kind of does justice to the disruption that Mason Graham causes in the passing attack. You take a look at this film, Dill, two things that really stand out to me. One, obviously the get off. We've talked about that. But Mason Graham and his ability to be flexible and bendy at 300 plus pounds is absolutely incredible, right? You roll the film here. He's going to bend like an edge rusher. You could tell me Mason Graham's an edge rusher right here. I'm going to bend right beneath this left guard and then turn the corner and go make a play on Kyle McCord. Extremely special. And then you go to Kenneth Grant. Again, you said it best. This was probably his best game that we saw against Washington. Kenneth Grant's a speed to power guy. And again, when you have the ability to get off the line of scrimmage like Kenneth Grant has, and then obviously the power that he has in his hands, you're going to see Kenneth Grant, I mean, just really do what he wants with this guard and center. He's trying to get a double team. He just puts this guy right in the dirt. And then the athleticism to close the distance and make a play on Michael Penix, who was elite at being elusive and getting out of the pocket. The combination of the strength and power, but also the ability to make your play once you're in the backfield. Dill, we talk about this Michigan team heading into 2024. Like, it stops and starts with these two guys up front.
No, and they really did. I mean, you really started to see them take football games over again. I think you look at that Alabama game, that Penn State game, that Ohio State, and into the Washington game. I mean, those were 4 games that a lot of you saw Alabama's offensive line play really good football against Georgia the week before, kind of that vaunted Georgia defense. And then you see Michigan go up there and just dominate them. And Kenny Grant playing one of his better games. Then against Washington, Joe Moore Award winners, Kenny Grant dominating that football game, Mason Graham doing what he did all year. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you're right. As much as like people like to talk about everything else, and that is why Michigan's defense was as good as it gets in college football, as we've seen. I mean, they were good everywhere. Linebackers are great. Secondary is great. But it started and stopped with that defensive line. When they were taking games over, there was nothing anyone could do. In those two semifinal and final games, it didn't matter what was happening because they were both dominated so thoroughly up front.
So you talk about like what was different about this Michigan team versus the Michigan teams we saw in 2022 losing to TCU and 2021 losing to Georgia. I mean, I'd say the biggest difference outside of J.J. McCarthy being one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but on the defensive side of the football is the dominant defensive line, right? Dill, you look at Alabama the week prior, or I guess in the SEC championship game against Georgia, they bullied Georgia's defensive line. Like, make no mistake about it, absolutely moving them off the line of scrimmage. Then Michigan comes to town. They meet in the Rose Bowl, and Michigan just hands Alabama up front. And I think that was kind of the differentiator for this Michigan team. I think it's what made this Michigan team special.
You're right. They didn't have, like, I mean, aside, they had really good edge play in 2021, but we haven't seen anything like what they had in terms of being able to just take games over inside. They didn't have that kind of first-round caliber player for a long time. And then you see 2 come around who, especially as Kenny Grant kind of rounded into shape towards the end of the year. I mean, you just saw there was not a whole lot teams could do against them because those 2 are really starting to
and Chris Jenkins probably going to be a guy that goes in the top 100. So you're talking about, I mean, 3-4 guys on the inside that are NFL caliber guys. Mason Graham being, in my mind, a top 10 caliber guy. And you look at what made Georgia so special, right? Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Devontae White. That's kind of what Michigan's defensive line was in 2023. Now, the last thing I want to just briefly touch about, and we're going to talk a lot about this in spring practice, is the depth behind those 2. I think one of the things that was so special is, all right, you have Mason Graham and Chris Jenkins when they're coming off the ball or coming off the field, and Kenneth Grant and Rayshawn Benny are coming in. You have a really good trio in Kenneth Graham, Mason Graham, and Rayshawn Benny, who we're sleeping on. Like, Rayshawn Benny is a starter. I almost every single.
He might have saved the game against Penn State. I don't know if he doesn't cause that fumble.
Rayshawn Benny's guy. Like, make no mistake about it. I think the question is, all right, who in the younger ranks is going to step up and be those guys? My personal pick, Eno Etta, but that's in my mind a big storyline because, again, you talk about 2 of the best players on the inside in Kenny Grant and Mason Graham. You got to have that depth. I think that's a massive question that we have heading into spring practice. We'll keep you all updated on that. Wanted to hop on, talk about, I mean, our 2 favorite players on this Michigan program. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas again. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.